welcome back. Thank you for staying with us on Monday Special. And joining me now is Third Way Alliance presidential candidate, Dr. Aukot. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Han.
But we don't begin with good news. IEBC says that you will not be on the ballot on October 17th.
Actually, it should be bad news for IEBC because I think for me it just confirms what we have said all along, that we have a commission that has problems understanding basic law. Basically, a problem interpreting its own mandate under the Constitution, and basically interpreting the decision of the judges. I don't know how they reached that verdict. First of all, the Supreme Court hasn't really pronounced itself comprehensively on what they mean by a fresh election. But what we know is that the judges said that the Constitution, the election that was just concluded, was not held in accordance with the dictates of the Constitution, rule of law, and the regulations, and therefore they declared that presidential election invalid, null and void, which means there was really no election, and they ordered a repeat of the election afresh. Now, if you repeat this election afresh, it means all the parties that participated in that initial election must be in the ballot afresh. It is up to the candidates to elect whether they want to participate in this election or not. Now, the reason I say Chebukati, I think, is proving to be very ignorant about the law, even though really he should be at the same level as the Supreme Court judges to be able to interpret the Constitution. Now, the argument that I'm hearing predominantly is that the 2013 Supreme Court pronounced itself on what it means by a fresh election.
Right.
Now, the 2013 election petition comprehensively pronounced itself on what it means by that. And that petition, in the Constitution, the Supreme Court speaks about the nature of the petition. Depending on the nature of the petition, then you can decide whether the people participating in a second election are the president-elect and the petitioner, or any other candidate. And in fact, in that 2013 judgment at paragraph 291, it says what a fresh presidential petition, a fresh election means, because they are talking about the nature of the petition itself. If the nature of the petition is such that you are saying, I won this election, he did not win, and therefore that is the nature there is a rerun or a runoff. Basically, actually a runoff that I won. But if you are not able to prove, or if you are able to prove that, then you only go to number one or number two. But in our instant case, the 2017, first of all, the judges have not really expressed their mind fully on what a fresh election means. So, for all intents and purposes,
they're jumping the gun on that, eh?
The basic understanding, therefore, or the basic interpretation is that if there was no election held in accordance with the law, the Constitution, and the regulations, then the basic interpretation, and this is where, for me, I'm surprised at Chebukati level, that he cannot understand that to mean you repeat the election afresh.
As it was. All right.
Yes.
Okay. We need to just move speedily along. What are your views in terms of what it will take for IEBC to be able to carry out a credible election in about 42 days' time? And you've talked specifically about certain officers being removed. On what grounds?
Okay, first of all, so again, you need to interpret the decision, the orders of the court. The orders of the court are very clear, that they found that certain elements within IEBC committed illegalities and irregularities. The first one is Chebukati himself, who was the first respondent, and the second one, IEBC in its entirety. Now, that means for me that if you are going to hold a credible election going forward, then it means Chebukati, who has been found culpable of having committed irregularities and illegalities, should not preside over this election. He must resign. And we have made that very clear in our press statement yesterday, that we still have 5 other commissioners who can actually preside over this election. So Chebukati must go. The judges also found that the transmission of the results as required by law was problematic, it was irregular, it was illegal, which means the person currently in charge of ICT at IEBC must therefore not be able to preside the next election because he's been found culpable. The judges also found out that this election was not in conformity with the dictates of the Constitution and the rule of law, which means the person currently responsible for advising the Commission on matters legal affairs, Praxidis Torore, cannot preside over the next election. The judges also found that the election, the way it was managed, was actually irregular, illegal, which means Immaculate Kasait, who is the director of elections at IEBC, cannot preside over the election. Then, of course, there is who is the boss at IEBC? Ezra Chiloba, the CEO, who is the guy who manages. We know that the management of Form 34A, 34Bs by the various 290 presiding officers was problematic, was illegal, was irregular. So he must take full responsibility. So,
right, how do you propose that these positions are filled? So,
first of all, they don't have to be filled in the first instance based on the exigencies of time. They don't have to be filled because Chiloba has a deputy, Kasaita has a deputy, Muhati has a deputy, Praxidis has a deputy.
So you agree with the proposals that IBC has today, say for the part of the chairman being removed, that deputies should then succeed their bosses?
Absolutely, because we are talking about here the exigencies of time, and you know, we are dealing with a constitutional timeline. So we don't have to be bogged into the whole idea of recruitment of new commission, and we have made it clear as a party that we are not for the disbandment of the IEBC as NASA is proposing. So that's the point of departure from us, because we believe that every time we hold an election, we want a new commission, we are disbanding it.
Have you backtracked from your statement that the UN should hold these elections?
Not entirely. And this is the compromise. We have presented two positions here. We have said, okay, if we are not going to deal with the bad elements at the IEBC as currently constituted, beginning with Chebukati himself, Chiloba and his other guys, then I think there is a deep-seated problem in Kenya today, and we cannot run away from it. We have got a serious issue as whether we can trust IEBC as currently constituted. Now, if we don't address those bad elements, which the judgment of the Supreme Court itself has actually identified, then we may need, and I use the word we may need, to look for another neutral arbiter, another referee to be able to hold this election. Look,
it sounds like a blanket indictment on all Kenyans, that Kenyans cannot be trusted to run their own elections, that we need, some would go as far as saying foreigners to come and
not
vote for us.
Necessarily. I mean, let's be very brutally honest today. I think we have a problem with the IEBC as currently constituted. The judgment itself said Chebukati, IEBC, and some of the elements within IEBC have committed certain irregularities and illegalities. Listen, it's like you've got you have a referee who has been found to have fixed a match, favored a certain team. Then you are saying the same referee, even before we punish him or suspend him, must referee the same match again. Or it's like picking a robber who robbed you to then take care of your property. I mean,
and that may be arguable to the extent that we're talking about replacing them with locals to do the same job. But for one who's running to be the president of the republic and showing a lack of faith in local institutions to run these elections, don't you think to some extent it is speaking from both sides of your mouth?
No, we have been very clear that if IEBC is, with all its attendant problems currently, is not fixed, and the Supreme Court has spoken about it, it's not a Aukot who has said it. There is a question of mistrust, you know. So if you are not going to trust this, and you've heard the NASA Brigade say that we are not going to this election, Third Way Alliance Kenya and myself are the only ones who are saying, I think there is a middle position here that can restore some confidence and trust in the institution of IEBC, and that is deal with the bad elements. Let's punish people who may have committed irregularities and illegalities. But if we are going to be stuck on the fact that we are not going to fix IEBC as it is today, and because of the deep-seated mistrust, we must hold an election either way. Kenya cannot be held ransom. That's why I was suggesting, is there a possibility we can actually consider the United Nations, which, by the way, has held elections in many countries in the world. because of a crisis. So I'm talking a situation where there is a crisis where you've got protagonists saying we are not going to go into this election because of this and that. Yeah.
So it is a last resort sort of option.
It's a last resort.
We are absolutely out of time. I thank you for coming to studio, Dr. Aukot of Third Way Alliance. We're taking a short break. We'll return, of course, with Jubilee Party Vice Chairman David Murathe, NASA Chief Executive Norman Magaya, and former